Hi there folks, welcome back to my channel, and for this video I'm going to be doing another book review, and for this one it's going to be part of the historical fiction challenge that I set myself earlier on this year. And before I get into the main body of the video, if you enjoy my videos, if you enjoy my channel, please click on the subscriber button, please click on that notification bell, leave some likes, leave some comments. It's always really appreciated and I do really like hearing from you all. So back on to the topic of the video at hand. The book that I'm going to be talking about today is called The Maid, and it's by a writer called Kimberly Cutter. And it tells the story of Joan of Arc, or Jehanne Darc as her name was pronounced in French. And for those that don't know, Joan of Arc was a young peasant girl who managed to become the leader of the French army and helped turn the tide against the English army during the 100-Year War. And a lot of it came down to the fact that she claimed that she heard the voices of the saints and archangels. I think the three primary ones were St. Catherine, St. Margaret and St. Michael, who's one of the archangels. And they were essentially telling her that it was God's will that she was to go off, make herself known to Charles, the Dauphin of France, who later became king, and she was to lead his army and to help win back France from the English. So that's a basic kind of premise of the story. And the book itself, The Maid, actually does present Joan as being quite young, quite naive, uneducated, and kind of essentially a bit of a child. She was really young when this all happened. I think kind of when it started, she was only about 16, and she started hearing the voices and started having these visions. And the book also kind of presents her father as having kind of mental health issues, of being kind of mentally unstable, which does kind of play into kind of opening up the possibility that Joan herself may have had some sort of mental health issue. Because most modern academics now argue that even though Joan did achieve amazing things like that could never be denied, but it has now been kind of put forward as generally accepted amongst academics that Joan had some form of schizophrenia. And this is a topic that's also touched upon in the 1990 movie called The Messenger, and it starred, and I'm just looking down at my notes at the moment, it starred Mila Jokovic, who again is kind of probably most famous for being in The Fifth Element and the Resident Evil saga. It's actually a really good movie. So one of my friends actually got me to sit down and watch it kind of a few years back. And it's actually a really, really good movie. It's kind of really well shot, really well acted. And it's just generally just a really good movie. And it does kind of leave it open for interpretation, that you could go, oh, it was the voice of the saints and the angels, or yeah, she was kind of unstable. I think it's kind of quite an interesting kind of way of doing it. And it's kind of quite a kind of bit of a tightrope to walk doing it that way, but when it's well done, it's well done. And it does also, the book itself, The Maid, also does touch on the fact that even by the age of 16, Joan had already faced a hell of a lot during the 100-Year War. She'd lost family, her sister was pregnant at the time when this happened. Her sister had disappeared and was later found dead, and it's kind of presumed that she was murdered by the English, that her family were starving, that people try to fight back and defend themselves, but the English kept coming, and so that may have kind of played a part in what actually ended up happening, and may have actually been part of the reason why Joan felt the need to kind of go and actually try and defend France. And the book itself, the way that Kimberly Cutter has written The Maid, is kind of quite a simplistic style. She doesn't go into kind of loads of detail. She doesn't barrage the reader with information on how a siege is fought, or how a siege is broken, or how a siege weapon is used, or how somebody would use a lance, or how they'd use a sword. It's just you're kind of informed through the story that these are some of the things that are happening, but you're not given a history lecture. You're not told, oh, you need to know this, here's all this information you could go and read in a history book or look up online, which to me generally kind of drags me out of a story, and I can actually find really annoying. I have actually kind of found that with writers like Bernard Cornwell. He'll just kind of give you a massive info dump, which kind of would drag me out the story, and then just kind of continue with the story. So I'm struggling to get back in, and it's just not annoying as hell. But Kimberly Cutter has sort of avoided doing that, and so it's a kind of understated way of writing a story, but it's kind of still kind of well written, and the story is still well told. But the way that it's written, this kind of simplistic style, almost suggests at Joan's simplistic worldview that she's not had this education that you'd get if she had been highborn, or if she had ended up being a guy who went into the priesthood or was a political leader of France. They would kind of see things more in different varying shades of grey, and would kind of go, okay, how would this benefit me? Joan's just very much kind of, it's black, it's white, it's right, it's wrong, it's God or it's the devil, right? It's very simplistic, very kind of a kind of binary way of looking at the world. And I think I kind of quite like that. Is the way that the story was written does suggest at that simplistic kind of worldview that Joan had. And as the story progresses, as Joan kind of finds her way into the court, finds her way to the Dauphin, and I should really explain what a Dauphin is for anybody who doesn't know. The Dauphin of France was essentially, it was kind of like the heir to the French throne. So it's almost like a bit like with the British monarchy, it's almost a bit like the kind of the Prince of Wales, or that's the impression I've always had. It's the same kind of, they're both the kind of the heir to the respective thrones. If I am wrong, kind of please let me know in the comments below. And as she is kind of coming into contact with people like Charles the Dauphin, with other members of the court, with kind of leading members of the church in France, as a reader, you're being shown the level of hostility that she had to face. That a lot of these people saw Joan as being a threat to their power, to their influence. That the people who were in the court, who had the ear of the Dauphin, were kind of starting to see this young, uneducated peasant girl coming in, who was starting to kind of turn Charles's head. He was listening to her, he wasn't listening to them. So that was it. That was a threat and a challenge to their position. And with the people in the church, with the priests and the cardinals, they were looking at it going, well, who is this young peasant girl coming along and saying that she knows what the will of God is? To them, that was their job. That was what they were supposed to be doing. And if they were being shown as not having that level of power, then that could kind of bring it all crashing down for them. So that's kind of why they were kind of looking at Joan as being this threat. And there were also a lot of people had kind of doubts about her mission. There were those who saw her as possibly kind of being sent by the devil, that she could have been sent by what was evil in this world to kind of try and kind of lead France astray, to lead Charles astray and destroy everything that they had left, and to stop him from being able to fight back against the English. And this can be clearly seen when those in the church essentially demanded that they carried out an exorcism on Joan to try and prove that she wasn't possessed and that she hadn't been sent by the devil. And the fact that, they also kind of were making sure that she wasn't lying about the fact that she was a maid. So it's like there's a lot of kind of pressure being put on her, and that in itself, for like somebody so young, somebody who would have been fairly naive and inexperienced. She'd grown up in the country all her life and would never have come across anything like that in her entire life, and here it was just being forced upon her. And it's also the fact that she wasn't just fighting against the English, she was fighting against the mistrust and the kind of the hatred that she had to face from essentially people who were supposed to be on her own side. And even though there was one line in the book that did maybe cringe slightly, even though the majority of it was really well written, essentially it was, there's sort of one character talking to Joan about suits of armour, and the quote essentially goes, "You know, once you get tipped into one of those things," meaning the suits of armour, you're, I'm thinking I'm reading the quote wrong. I'll start that one again. So, you know, once you get tipped in one of those things, like, meaning kind of being in one of the suits of armour and being kind of like knocked over or pushed over, you're like a crab flipped onto its back. And yeah, that's not an accurate statement, as I've seen quite a bit of video footage of people who are in full suits of armour, full authentic medieval suits of armour. And yeah, these suits of armour do weigh a hell of a lot. Is the fact that when you kind of put it in perspective, the Kevlar vests that police in the UK wear nowadays weigh about 2 stone. A basic shirt of chainmail weighs 3 stone. But I have seen video footage of people wearing those suits of armour who are doing frontward rolls. They're throwing themselves about, picking themselves back up, they're jumping up into their horses or jumping off their horses. Like, it can be done. Okay, generally by people who have been wearing suits of armour for years and are used to the weight and kind of know what they're doing and know how to move in them. But that was like, I think that's the only line that I read, or the only quote that I read in the book that kind of made me go, yeah, not right, no. So kind of back onto the main bit of the main reason for the video. Even though I did really enjoy reading The Maid, I did think it was a really good book, I did think it was overly vague when it came to the battles. It was okay, she would talk about big things that happened, like a kind of makeshift boat being sailed onto a moat surrounding a walled town. It's been filled with pitch and it's been set alight and it's been kind of sailed towards kind of, I think it's a drawbridge. Things like that are mentioned, but a lot of it is kind of left unsaid. there's no real mention of what a lot of the other characters are feeling. It's very much from Joan's perspective, so you're not kind of being told a lot of different things that are going on. But then again, doing that could have led on to the whole kind of infamously annoying info dumps. But there was kind of one bit that I did actually quite find interesting, that I'm not going to go into too much detail here because it was quite an infamously disturbing case in French history. But in the story, and in the novel, Cutter does briefly touch upon what one of the characters was really like, and that character was Gilles. I really do hope I'm pronouncing that name right. And he was one of the barons from France. He was one of the leaders in the army that Joan was fighting as part of. He was later became the Marshal of France once Charles Dauphin had been crowned king. And after the war, after France had won the war and he'd retired from military life, certain stories about him came to light which were highly disturbing and highly unpleasant, and which, yeah, you can look him up online. I'll try and kind of put a Wikipedia link to about him in the description bar below, but I will give trigger warnings. It does involve children. But yeah, it's just, there's one scene where Joan walks into a barn during a battle because she heard a scream, and she finds Gilles in a very compromising situation. And the fact that Cutter doesn't have to tell us that Joan was in shock, it's just clearly stated by the fact that Joan takes one look at what's going on, turns back around and just walks the hell out of the barn, and nearly gets herself killed. Yeah, that is like, to me, it's like, that is like kind of quite a kind of simple way of kind of putting it across how shocked somebody is by what they've just seen. And I have read up a wee bit up about Gilles, and yeah, it does sound like a very disturbing character. And to be honest, I actually think he sounds like quite an interesting character to write a novel about. So Kimberly Cutter, I think you may have actually given me a story idea for a later novel, so thank you. So I'll try not to get too bogged down on talking about Darc just now, and I'll try and wrap this video up just now because I can tell it's kind of getting a bit on the long side. But I generally, even though there were like slight things that annoyed me about The Maid by Kimberly Cutter, I did really enjoy the book on the whole. And it's, I think, the build up to Joan's death, even though Joan's death was never explicitly talked about, you never actually saw her death, it was just, there was just this kind of almost like a slow build up. You knew it was coming, and you knew she wasn't gonna get out of this alive. And it's just that kind of moment the book ends. It's just Joan knows that she's not getting out, and that's how the main bit of the story just ends. Okay, there's a couple of short epilogues that explain kind of a couple of short things that happened after. But it's just the fact that Joan has come to the realisation that she's not going to get out of it alive. And that's how the book ends. It's like, I think that was kind of quite good and quite clever. So, it is one of the books I did actually manage to finish reading this year. It's not on my list of did not finish. So, The Maid by Kimberly Cutter is one of the books I actually really enjoyed reading this year, and I would recommend for anyone who is kind of interested in the 100-Year War period in French and English history, is interested in the story of Joan of Arc or Jehanne Darc, and or is possibly kind of interested in starting reading historical fiction, so this one gets a thumbs up. And I hope you all enjoyed that video, and I hope that kind of whets your appetite and you all want to go off and read The Maid by Kimberly Cutter. And again, if you enjoy my videos, if you enjoy my channel, please click on the Please click on the subscription button below. Please click on that notification bell. Leave some likes, leave some comments, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.